I'm going to give a brief overview of the main findings of the research. I would like to highlight 3 points. The first one has to do with when all started in Argentina, not this trend of government and deploying surveillance technology. And we can say that this started in 2008, when governments across the country, local governments, provincial governments, and even the national government started to deploy CCTV cameras across the public spaces in Argentina. This had to do with in that time, there was like many famous far-reaching crimes that trigger the fears of the people, no? And there were several surveys at that time that say that Argentinians think that public safety is the most pressing issue in the country, and which was very curious, because if you take a look at the criminal data of that time, you could see that Argentina is one of the countries with the lowest record in the region, Latin America. So you could say that it's very unjustified now. This narrative of inducing fear in the people through public safety issue was at the forefront of the narrative in the public officials in the country back then. That narrative is also justified by the government to avoid sharing information about the kind of technology acquired. No? As Veronica said before, transparency is a very troublesome issue in Argentina, because during our research, we submitted several freedom of information requests, but most of those requests were never answered. And those who were answered, their responses were very insufficient, very vague, and they didn't provide the information that we wanted. The second point that I would like to highlight has to do with biometrics. And in 2011, the national government launched CIVIOS. CIVIOS is the acronym in Spanish for Federal Identification Biometric System for Security, which was and is a massive biometric database run by the federal police and the Ministry of Security in Argentina. For every Argentine citizen, is mandatory to receive an ID card. No? And the government started to issue those ID cards with biometric data. No? So they ask you your fingerprints, and your face photo, and your palm prints. Now, those data are gathered by the National Citizen Registry, which provides the data for this CIVIOS biometric database. CIVIOS was like the platform for several implementations of biometrics in the country in issues like immigration, social services, taxes, education, sport, and so on. And the third point that I would like to mention is that from like 4 or 5 years ago, the deployment of facial recognition technology are becoming very pervasive in Argentina. The most famous case in terms of relevance is the facial recognition system deployed by the government of the city of Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina, in 2019. And the goal of this system is to track citizens that with criminal records, fugitives. After its implementation, there were several cases of false positive, people who were wrongly identified as a fugitive, and some of them spent like a week in prison, and so forth. Another problem with this system is that there wasn't any human rights impact assessment, there wasn't any privacy impact assessment. In fact, the rapporteur of privacy at the UN visited Argentina in 2019, and he explicitly said that the government of Buenos Aires couldn't explain the reasons or the proportionality of the system. No? They couldn't justify that. This trend of facial recognition system is not only present in Buenos Aires, but also in other cities like Córdoba, Mendoza, and San Juan. and those cases are reported in the research, and provide, like I would say, a very dangerous situation in Argentina. Why? Because we Argentina have strong laws, especially the right regarding the right to privacy and data protection issues, but there is a big difference between the legal framework and what really happens in the practice. Governments are often make use of the exception to those laws, so they say we are doing this for public safety reason because it's an essential function of the government to do this kind of tax. So we are exempted of those safeguards that the data protection law in Argentina established. Another problem is that we don't have a strong data protection authority, that has the sufficient human and economic resources to carry out research, investigations, and impose fines if that is the case. And the third point that I would like to raise about this matter is that, unfortunately, public officials in Argentina cannot be held accountable for not providing information, for not being transparent, etc. That's one of my main conclusions, personal conclusion about this report. It's like they don't pay political costs, they don't pay any price for not providing information, which is very very sad because they don't have the incentives to behave in a more transparent and democratic way. So I mean, for the future, I think that public opinion, public citizens has to be more aware of these trends and put more pressure into the government. So that's one of my main hopes with this report. Try to contribute to spread the word about this issue in Argentina, so citizens can have a more comprehensive knowledge about what's happening in their country and can push forward for more transparency, for more restrictions, and for more and to make their rights to be respected by the government. So I have a lot more to do, but I will stop here because I think that I'm out of time. But anyway, we can continue with the Q&A. So thank you.